Man, Trey and Tanya might be able to contain their excitement, but if I knew how to dance, I'd be doing the happy dance right now. In just 4 weeks, I hope you didn't miss that announcement. In just 4 weeks, we're going to start phasing in live in-person services again. And we're going to start here in Mechanicsville. So I don't know about you, but man, I am so excited about that and so looking forward to that. There will be some more information coming as it relates to that, some instructions and all that go along with that. But man, let me just tell you, I am so excited. I cannot wait to see people in the building on Sunday morning again. So make sure you mark your calendars for that, April 11th. Well, let me just welcome you back this morning, or maybe it's your first time joining us. Let me just welcome you. We're having a conversation about making better decisions. And so as we begin today, I want to start by asking a question. And the question is this: do you know what stands between you and a better decision? Do you know what is standing between you and you making a better decision? Well, I'll tell you this. It's the same thing that's standing between you and a regret. Now, what is that? Well, the thing that's standing between you and a better decision is a good question. In fact, we know that good decisions come from good questions, don't they? And so out of that, if we ask the right questions, then we can make better decisions. So Andy Stanley, this is the book that kind of inspired this series. He titled it Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And in this book, he introduces us to 5 questions, he says, to help you determine your next move. Or, in other words, 5 questions that we can be asking ourselves that will lead us to better decision making. And so we're taking some time to look at each one of these questions. Now, to be honest with you, and Andy would agree with this, in fact, he points this out as well in his book, these questions only work if we work them. And here's what I mean by that. They only work if we ask those questions sincerely. I mean, if we just throw the question out there, but we don't really ask because we really want to know the answer, it's not going to work. And so it's not just about asking, it's also about answering those questions and being honest with our answers. In other words, don't just blow it off or give a random answer, but really, what is my honest answer to that question? And then once we have our answer, the next thing is to act accordingly, to act based on the information that we have. And so there's a theme verse that we are using for this series. It comes out of Proverbs 27:12, and it says this: "The prudent seek danger and take refuge." The prudent seek danger and take refuge. In other words, the wise person, the smart person, the person that's really paying attention, they see what's coming and they take refuge. They do something about it. But then he goes on and says, "But the simple keep going and they pay the penalty." The simple keep going and they pay the penalty. In other words, they know the right answers. Maybe they've asked these questions and they've answered them honestly, but they fail to act on them. And so they just keep going, and as a result of that, they pay a serious penalty for doing so. Our decisions, as we've talked about, don't just affect us. And to be honest with you, neither do our regrets. The better decisions that we make, the fewer regrets that we will have, and the less impact we'll have on others, or maybe the greater impact, depending on how you answer that question. So if the only thing standing between you and a good decision or a better decision is a good question, what are the questions that you should be asking yourself? Well, that's what we've been looking at. We've covered the first 3 so far. The first one is called the integrity question. And the question that we're asking is, am I being honest with myself, really? Am I being honest with myself, really? Do you know the easiest person to deceive in your life is yourself? Do you know the hardest person to lead in your life is yourself as well? And that's because we do a great job at selling ourselves on something, don't we? We can talk ourselves into almost anything or even talk ourselves out of things sometimes. And so the integrity question is about us asking those questions and being honest with ourselves, really. Now, the decision that we hope this leads us to is this: I will not lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. I will not lie to myself even when I don't like the truth. Even when I don't like the answer, but I know that it is the better thing for me to do, and so I'm going to follow that. So that's the first question that we ask ourselves. The second question is this. It's called the legacy question, and the question is, what story do I want to tell? You are writing and telling a story with your life. Every single day, with every decision that you make, you're writing the next chapter, the next page to your story. So the question is, what story do you want to tell with your life? When people look back at your life and they look at the decisions that you made, what is it you want them to see, and what is it that you want them to remember about you? Now, the decision that we're working toward on this one is this: I will decide a story that I'm proud to tell. I will decide a story that I'm proud to tell. Only you can write your story based on the decisions that you make. So it's important that we make better decisions and have fewer regrets in our life. Question number 3. This is the one we looked at last week. It's called the conscience question. And the question is this: is there a tension that deserves my attention? Is there a tension that deserves my attention? We've all been there. Last week, I referred to these as those kind of red flag moments, those moments where you're about to make a decision, but you know deep down inside of you that something's not right. There's something that causes you to hesitate, even sometimes for just a moment. Sometimes we know what it is, and to be honest with you, sometimes we don't. We just know that something's not right. There's maybe some missing information in regards to the decision that we're about to make. And so the decision that we're trying to get to is this: I will explore rather than ignore my conscience. How many times have we done that? How many times have we ignored that tension that's inside of us and made a decision only to go, man, I wish I'd have taken some time and paid a little bit more attention to that tension that's in my life. We've all been there. We've all done that. And so that leads us to the fourth question, which is today's question, and it's called the maturity question. The maturity question. Now, why is it called the maturity question? Well, to be honest with you, the reason it's called that is because it takes a lot of maturity to answer this question. Most of us live life on the edge. And by that I mean we like to live life right up to the edge or maybe just over the edge if we think we can get by with it. We live on the edge of what's right and wrong, or maybe good and bad, moral and immoral, or legal and not legal. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. How many of you drive at or below the posted speed limit? If we're honest, most of us don't, do we? In fact, we'll drive right at the speed limit and oftentimes a few miles over that speed limit because we think we can get by with it. So I was in a conversation this week with some folks, and I won't give their names because they're staff and I don't want to get them in trouble, but the conversation basically went like this. One of the staff members was on their way to work one morning and a police officer began following them, and they got nervous and as if they had something to hide. I didn't ask them what they were nervous about. Maybe I should go back and ask them that. But they said, so they started driving 5 miles an hour below the speed limit in hopes that the policeman would go around them. Now, we've all been there, right? You know, out of nowhere, a policeman shows up, they're following us, and it's not that we've done anything wrong, but we just feel like we've done something wrong, or we're afraid we've done something wrong that we haven't done. So we've all been there, we've all been nervous. So this person jokingly said, you know, I started driving 5 miles an hour below the speed limit, hoping that policeman would eventually get tired of following me and go around and pass me. Now, another person at the table chimed in and said, hey, well, you know that you can drive 5 miles an hour over the speed limit before they will pull you over. And I thought, isn't that the way we live our lives, don't we? Here in Virginia, it's reckless driving is 80 miles per hour. So if you get caught driving 80 or more, that would be a reckless driving ticket. And so here's what I see people do all the time. Not that I would ever do this, but in a 70 mile an hour speed zone, what do we drive? 79 miles per hour. We do that, don't we? We love living that way. We love living on the edge. And so oftentimes it kind of looks like this. If it's not wrong, then it's all right. We look at something and we determine, well, if it's not wrong, then it's all right for me to do it. If it's not illegal, then it's permissible. If it's not immoral, it's acceptable. If it's not over the line, then it's fine. It's fine for me to do. And so this is the way we justify our decisions often. Which usually leads us, when we're about to make a decision, to asking this question: what's wrong with it? What's wrong with the decision that I'm about to make? What's wrong with me buying that? What's wrong with me dating that person, or whatever it might be? And so the problem with this question is the question that it leads to next in our lives, which is this: how did I get myself into this? How did I get myself into this? Well, the way we got ourselves into this is because we asked the wrong question to begin with. Now, intuitively, I think we know that that's the wrong question to ask. We know from past experiences that it almost never leads to a good decision, or definitely a better decision. Just the opposite. What happens when we ask that question, what's wrong with it, is that it leads to regrets. How did I get myself into this? And so here's what we know about regrets. Regrets are always preceded by a list of bad decisions that we make, of decisions that honestly, if we were honest, we know they were not the right decisions to make to begin with. Now, so the maturity question that we need to ask then is this: what is the wise thing for me to do? What is the wise thing for me to do? Now notice what this question doesn't ask. What is the good thing for me to do? What is the right thing for me to do? What is the legal thing for me to do? What is the moral thing for me to do? Not that those are bad questions, but the better question is this: what is the wise thing to do? And the reason it's a maturity question, because it takes a lot of maturity to honestly answer this question and to be real with ourselves about it. What is the wise thing to do? Now, let me ask you this: have you ever made an unwise decision? It wasn't that you did anything wrong or immoral or even illegal, but it just wasn't the right decision. It wasn't the better decision to be made. We've all done that, don't we? We all make unwise decisions from time to time. Let me give you an example of a decision I recently made that wasn't a very wise decision. So since November or December of last year, I have pulled my groin. Well, back in December, I pulled my groin to the point it got so bad that I could not walk without the assistance of one of these things right here. You can ask my wife. I mean, I was confined to a chair in our living room. I slept in it for several nights. So I eventually thought I was better. I went back and did something. I pulled it again, and then a third time. And the third time that I did it, I was at home, confined to the chair in the living room, and there came a knock at the door. Now, during this time, my dad knew that I wasn't able to get around too good, and so every day he would go out and check the mail for me, and then he would bring it to the front door early afternoon and let me know that it was there. So on this one particular day, I'm sitting there in the chair. I hear the screen door open on our front door, and somebody knocks on the door, and I just assume that it's Dad. I mean, he's the only, nobody ever does this. They either ring the doorbell if they're not family members. So this person had opened the door. I heard it open. I heard him knock. They didn't ring the doorbell. So I just knew it was my dad. So I began to holler, "Hey, the door's unlocked." In fact, I had unlocked it earlier in anticipation of my dad bringing us the mail. And so I'm sitting in my recliner. I can see the door, the front door from where I'm at. Person knocks, and I begin to holler, "Hey, it's open. Come on in." Nobody does anything. Hey, Dad, the door's open. It's unlocked. Go ahead and come on in. I must have said that 3 or 4 times, and I'm watching the front door, and just as I'm thinking I'm going to have to get up because they can't hear me, the door opens up, and somebody's head comes through the door. And at that moment, I realized I had made a really unwise decision because I had no idea who that person was standing at the door, peeking through. It was just as awkward for me as it was for them. Now, the story gets better. All right? Of all the people who could show up at my door that day was a salesman. Guess what he was selling? Home security systems. I do not lie. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. The one time that I do this and the person standing at the door is wanting to sell me. Now, it got even better because as I got to talking to this guy, I found out that he was a former police officer. And so I'm thinking, man, I don't want to look dumb in front of this guy. Maybe I just need to go ahead and buy the system. Well, I didn't buy it, long story short. So here's my point. That's a soft example of what I'm talking about, but it makes the point. Let me show you something that Paul said in a letter to the local church. Paul was an early follower of Christ. He wasn't always a follower of Christ. He meets Christ after Christ's resurrection, becomes a follower, and then he becomes a writer of pretty much most of our New Testament. And so he would write these letters of encouragement and wisdom to local churches during his day. And those letters still serve the church very much today. So I wanted to show you something that Paul says on this in this way of thinking. Here's what he says in Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 15. He says, be very careful. Everybody say careful. Be very careful then how you live. Listen, we understand that we don't always make good decisions, don't we? And because we know this to be true about ourselves, we need to be very careful then how we live. To which he goes on and says, not as unwise, but as wise. Not as unwise, but as wise. So he says, be very careful then how you live your life. Not as an unwise person, but as wise, someone who makes better decisions. And then he goes on to say this, making the most of every opportunity. Everybody say most. Making the most of every opportunity. In other words, this goes back to something I said at the beginning. We need to ask and answer and act accordingly, don't we? That's how we make the most of every opportunity, of every decision that we're about to make. It may not seem like big decisions, but oftentimes those little decisions can lead to very big regrets. And so we need to be careful then, and we need to make the most of every opportunity. And then he ends this word of encouragement by saying this, because the days are what? The days are evil. The days are evil. We get that. We live in a world where it's getting harder and harder to know what is the right thing to do. Hard to know what is moral, what is acceptable, what's not, which can make it even harder for us to make better decisions. Because when we look at everything that's going on and the landscape is constantly changing and people's ideas and thoughts and so we go to make a decision and it's easy it's just hard sometimes to make better decisions. So let me challenge you with this. As you think about asking yourself this maturity question, what is the wise thing to do? I want you to answer it in reference to 3, we'll call them reference points in your life. And the 3 reference points are this. Next slide. We need to advance a couple there, guys. All right, here we go. These reference points, past, present, and future. When you're asking yourself this question, what is the wise thing for me to do? I want you to do it in reference to these 3 things. Now, this is going to be easy for you to remember, and it's going to make sense because we're going to take these and incorporate them into our question, what is the wise thing to do? And so the question then looks like this. In light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Let's look at it again. In light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, What is the wise thing for me to do? So 3 reference points that when we ask this question that we're going to consider. So the first one is this: in light of my past experiences, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past experiences, what is the wise thing for me to do? It's been said that those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. Those who do not learn from their past are condemned to repeat it. One of my favorite movies from when our sons were young is the movie Lion King. And there's a scene in there, and I guarantee if you've seen the movie, you remember this scene. So Simba is running from his past, and he meets up with the wise old Rafiki, a baboon who's just, he's like the all-wise one in the movie. And so he meets up with Simba, who's running from his past, and he begins the conversation with him. And in the course of this conversation and helping Simba to understand why he's running and what the decisions that he's making, Rafiki takes his staff, and he whacks Simba over the head with it. And Simba's like, what did you do that for? And Rafiki says, it doesn't matter, it's in the past. And so they continue this conversation, and a few minutes later, Rafiki swings again at Simba, only this time, Simba ducks. He learns from his past, and that's the point that he's trying to make with him. Listen, if we run from or ignore our past, the chances are we'll experience it again in the future, because you really can't outrun your past. Your past is a part of you. And if we ignore those things and we don't learn from them, and we're just going to repeat them at some point in the future. I'll tell you a story that helped me learn this many, many years ago. Lynette and I hadn't been married very long. We were driving this Mustang too. I call it a wannabe Mustang car back then, and the fender was all messed up on it. And a dealership right up the road had gotten in this really awesome, cool Jeep Cherokee. It was called the Golden Eagle. Had a big eagle across the hood, big tires. It was just, man, it was just what I wanted. I went and looked at it, and I wanted it so bad. But everything within me told me that this was a mistake. You talk about tension, the red flags, all of that was going on, but I talked myself into it anyway. I ignored all of that. And boy, did I pay a price. I regretted that decision up until the very day that I sold that thing. In fact, I was so nervous the day I sold, I was afraid it was going to break down before we could even get to the bank and swap keys and titles. But I remember that. So every time I think about certain purchases that I'm about to make, I go back to that experience and I ask myself, do I want to experience that again? And thankfully, most times I have made better decisions because of that. I've paid attention to the tension that was there. Listen, past experiences can bring wise counsel to the current decisions that you and I are about to make. Now, speaking of current decisions, let's move on to the next one. So, in light of my current circumstances, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my current circumstances, what is the wise thing for me to do? There are two main areas that I would identify that people seem to struggle with the most when it comes to current areas in their life. And it has to do with relationships, and the other is with money or finances. The divorce rate in our country is incredible. It's just amazing how many marriages, people who walk down the aisle, who are convinced that they're in this until death does them part, throw the towel in sometimes just months into a relationship. Our support group ministry called Divorce Care, on one hand, it's always great to see how many people sign up for that, but it's also heartbreaking because so many people have to sign up for it. And I'm thankful for this ministry because one of the things that this ministry really does is it helps people deal with their past experiences in light of current decisions and circumstances that they're about to make. And oftentimes, they're at a point where they're about to get married again. And so I know before I will remarry somebody, I always make sure that they've gone through that class, that course. Because listen, if they don't, they're just going to bring those past experiences into their current circumstances, which means it's probably going to end just like the first one did. When it comes to our finances, I think about how many times we live for the now without considering the future. You know, we want what we want and we want it now without thinking about next week or next month or next year when we've got this payment book. You know, I look at, I'm amazed at this, that during this time that our government has chosen to give out stimulus checks. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to take mine and enjoy it, but here's the point that I want to make. Guys, I've watched us get this money and people talk about how, you know, all the hardships that they're in, but yet I'll walk in stores and sporting goods stores, for example. That's one of my favorite places to go. And I'm amazed at the lines of people who are in line to buy stuff that they really don't need. But yet we're saying we're so strapped, we can't pay the bills, we can't pay the rent, we can't buy groceries, we can't make car payments, but yet we're buying stuff that we really don't need. And so I just look at that in light of current circumstances and past it, you know, what got you to this point? Because guys, I hope this is the only pandemic that we ever have to experience. But what if there's another one 5 years down the road? Are we going to be any more prepared for it than we are right now? Now, I know I'm meddling, but I think this makes the point. When the new wears off, when this next big idea, this next cool thing comes along, then what? Because this is the way we have a tendency to live our lives, isn't it? You know, for the moment, for the right now, our current decisions can rob us of future endeavors. Think about that for a moment. Our current decisions can rob us of future decisions. It can keep us from doing things and experiencing things that we want to do in the future. Which leads to the third reference point, and that is our future. And so in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? When I think about what I want to do in the future, when I think about the hopes and the dreams, and when you think about those things, are the current decisions that you're making setting you up for that? You know, even currently, how many times have you found yourself going, man, I wish I could, but I can't because of some decision that we made in the past? Think about that as you think about your hopes and your dreams for the future. You know, are the decisions that I'm making now setting me up for that? What is the wise thing for me to do? How many times have we not been able to do what we want to do because of past decisions that we've made? What we wouldn't do sometimes to undo those decisions so that we can do now what we want to do, but we can't because of decisions we made back then. What can I do now that will let me do that, whatever that is, as you think about your future hopes and dreams? What can I do now that would set me up for that in the future? Listen, your greatest regrets are always preceded by a series of unwise decisions. The litmus test for this is not what is the right thing or even what is the wrong thing to do. The maturity question asks, what is the wise thing to do? The decision that we want to make to go along with this is this: I will do the wise thing. I will do the wise thing. This morning, I want to try to bring this home. I just want to walk you through some questions in light of what we've talked about this morning and get you thinking about this. There's some questions online there that if you want to use this afternoon. In fact, there's some of the questions I'm about to ask you, and you can see those. But let me just ask you for a moment to get real with yourself, to be honest with yourself. Have you ever chosen the right thing to do over the wise thing to do? Have you ever chosen the right thing to do over the wise thing to do? We've all done that. Let me ask you this: what do you envision your future to look like? When you think about your future hopes and dreams, what do you envision that to look like for you, for your family, for your kids, for your grandkids, whatever it might be. What do you envision your future to look like? Proverbs 27:12 says this, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple, well, they just keep going. They ignore the wise thing, and then because of that, they pay the penalty. So what do you know to be true about yourself from past experiences? This is a question that I've often asked myself, and I know as I worked through this book early in the year and got to this question, it was like, okay, what do I know to be true about myself? And so I sat down and I said, based on past experiences and decisions that I've made, here's what I know to be true about myself. And so I need to be aware of that as I make current decisions, as I even plan for the future. Paul again says in Ephesians 5, be very careful then how you live. Be very careful then how you live. In light of your past experiences, past decisions, what you know to be true about yourself, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. What can you learn from your past experiences that will help you make better decisions now, that will set you up for a better future? What do you need to start doing or maybe stop doing now to get to where you want to be in the future? Instead of just looking at your current circumstances and making a decision for right here and right now, how is the decision that I'm about to make, that you're about to make, going to affect my future? So to bring it home, in light of past experiences and your current circumstances and your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for you to do today? Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for the wisdom that you give us to make better decisions. Father, all of our lives are filled with regrets. All of us have made decisions that we would give anything, God, if we could go back and undo. And so, God, maybe we can't go back and undo those, but we can learn from them. And God, I pray that you would help us to be real, help us to be honest with ourselves. Lord, that you would make us prudent. And God, that we would grow up and not just make simple decisions and ignore what's right in front of us. God, help us. Give us the wisdom that we need to make wise decisions. Lord, your word says that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. God, that we would make wise decisions in light of you and the counsel that you give us, in light of what Christ has done for us, in light of the fact that other people matter to you just as much as we matter to you, and that, God, we would make decisions based on that, not just on our own wants and desires, but God, make us wise people. God, so that we can make better decisions that will affect right here and right now, but also the future. So that, God, as we get into the future, we can do the things that you call us and ask us to do. We won't be hindered by the decisions that we've made in the past. But, God, we will be free to be who you've called us to be and to do what you've called us to do. Father, I thank you for Jesus Christ. Father, I thank you for his willingness to be obedient to you, to leave heaven, come to earth, to die on a cross to pay for my sins, and not just my sins, but the sins of the world. Father, so that if we would just place our faith and trust in you, we could be forgiven of our sin. We could be forgiven of those regrets, those past decisions that we've made. And God, we can live a new life in Christ Jesus. Father, I thank you for your goodness and for your grace. And Father, now as we take just a moment to sing about that, God, that we would just be reminded of who you are and what you want to do in and through our lives. And I pray and ask this in Christ's name. And we all agreed together and said, amen.